Okay, can I have the... Okay, the mic is working, isn't it? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not sure whether the other session is finished, but if it hasn't, it will be finished shortly. And there isn't much space left in the room anyway. Welcome to this session on Thinking the Future. I'm delighted to see you all here. Some people say, you know, that we shouldn't think about the future because it will happen anyway. To those we say, well, this is actually the reason we should think about the future. If we don't think about it, somebody else will, and the future will actually be more like what they have in mind than what we have in mind. My name is Nikos Kastrinos. I work in DG Research. I'm responsible for promoting foresight in our policy. And I will be the moderator in this brief session. In our panel, we have 6 guests with interest in foresight from different perspectives. And what we want for you is to quiz them and to ask them about their expectations on foresight and to push them to tell you what they think about foresight in general and the EU foresight in particular. First, we have 2 guests from the government sector. Our guest of honor, Professor Valdemaras Razoumas, Lithuania's Vice Minister of Education, Science and Sport, previously Chair of the Research Council of Lithuania and President of the Lithuanian Academy of Sciences. We have with us Lydia Borel-Damian, Secretary General of Science Europe, the Association of National Research Funding and Research Performing Organizations. We have 2 guests from the world of industry. We have William Garcia, the Executive Director of CEFIC, the European Chemicals Industry Council, and Katharine Wagner, Head of Corporate Sustainability in HSBC, Germany. And we have 2 foresight experts from the world of research and consultancy. We have Kirsten Kuhls of the Fraunhofer Institute for Systems and Innovation Research and David Lai of SAMI Consulting in the UK. Kirsten and David have been involved in project with us, and they have an impressive library of foresight experiences, so you can ask them about the future freely. And then we have you, who I hope will challenge our panelists with questions and comments. What will happen is that I will first take a couple of minutes of your time to tell you what we think foresight is and what we do in the Commission and why, some very basics to set the conversation in perspective. And then I will ask each of our guests 1 question to basically allow them to tell us where they come from and what is their involvement with foresight. And then I will open the floor to groups of interventions and questions from you. What I will do is that I will try to pass each question to 1 panelist so that we can allow for as many interventions as we can. We have only 1 hour and it's not enough time. But if you think that I passed your question to the wrong panelist, feel free to bother them afterwards with bother the people you think should answer. Okay? Let me start with the general things. What is foresight? This is usually a question that is answered with a definition, and each definition that you get in each talk is different. Wikipedia says that foresight is the ability to predict the future. The best definition I have found comes from animal psychology. It says that foresight is the ability to mental time travel. It's the ability to position yourself in the past or in the future and to look in one or the other direction. So you can say, well, how would I be looking at myself 10 years ago in 2030? Or how was I thinking about the future in the past? And it's this mental shift that creates a perspective. Psychologists see foresight as innate. There are species that can do it and species that can't do it. In fact, whether animals have foresight is an important debate. And you can think that, okay, humans can do it, so foresight is something that I can do late at night in the office. I can plan the future, I can set my targets and then work backwards and find out exactly what I need to be doing, build my roadmap. And what happens is that none of us is the master of the future. So if you do this, chances are that things will not go where you think they will go, basically because we create part of the future and other people create parts of the future as well. So this is why foresight takes place in conversation. None of us is alone. We all form plans, and it's the collectivity that actually makes the future that prevails. For this reason, foresight is mostly conversations, and the the narrative in the trade is about strategic conversations. Now, think about it. What are the benefits of conversational mental time travel? Why do people do it? One is that when you change perspective, when you think of the past, the future, you actually see new things. Sometimes you get new ideas, you get epiphanies, you get aha moments. You think, something. And this is part of the benefits of foresight. Another benefit is in the conversation. In the conversation about the future, you learn about other people's plans about the future. So when your landlord says, I'm going to demolish the house, you're thinking, I may be thinking about moving out then. And it helps, it's intelligence. But most important, especially from the European policy perspective, is the relationships that you build during those conversations. Conversations about the future are enjoyable experiences, and they build good relations and they facilitate politics. And this is mostly why we try to get involved with this. Now, how does this relate to what we actually do in practice in DG Research in the Commission? Well, first we fund foresight research through Horizon 2020. We fund projects with titles such as A Vision and a Roadmap for European Raw Materials, Smart Urban Futures, The Future of Food and Nutrition Security. The investment in these projects is fully decentralized, and it's actually non-negligible, it's quite significant. Another thing that we do is that we link together all the services in the Commission to coordinate our investment in foresight and to promote it across the EU policies. We make true of the statement that the framework program is a program for the whole Commission by maintaining a network of foresight correspondents across the services. The third thing that we do is that we use this network through projects that aim to support individual Commission decisions and Commission proposals, individual strategies. So the most famous in this, the most well-known currently is the Bohemia project that we did to support the proposal for Horizon Europe, but we're currently launching projects to support the development of Horizon Europe missions, for example. These three strands of activities contribute to EU research and innovation policies, but there are always things that we can do better. One of the things that we certainly should be doing is learning from the experience of others and the advice and the critiques of what other people have to do, and this is what we hope to achieve in this session. So enough for the background and the self-congratulations of what the Commission does. I think I will now pass the floor to Professor Razumas and to ask him to tell us about foresight in Lithuania. How does it relate to what we do? How can it help building synergies between our policies? Thank you.
Good afternoon for the audience. Should I stand or I may sit?
As you wish.
Thank you. So you probably know that Lithuania is a relatively small country, less than 3 million inhabitants, and also with a relatively young democracy. So for our country and for the politicians, the synergies between different European policies and national policies, it is a very important issue because, as I said, for a small country, with the synergies of EU and national policies, we can find solutions for our society's needs. To my opinion, and with the increasing demand from the state, the first and very important step in while developing different strategies, it is important to have different foresights, including the research and innovation foresights. The moderator started with the definition, what is the foresight. I have a very similar definition, but it starts saying that that's an art for probing the future. So that's a bit higher level, saying that that's an art, not only the studies of the experts or governmental bodies. And to my opinion, the foresight, it anticipates events before they happen. So I mean, that's important. And in Lithuania, we had a couple of first exercises in foresight. Some of the panelists already participated in constructing these foresights for higher education, and also the last one, the foresight for smart specialization strategy. So that was a quite good exercise. Of course, we always face some problems with the implementation of foresight, but that's probably the general problem. And I'm proud that the government of Lithuania understands that the foresight is an important exercise, and just recently the government established the Strategic Analysis Center, and it will develop this center while developing different foresights for the country, not really only for the research and innovation, but for different areas of our country's life. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Professor Azumas. Let me turn to Lydia Borel-Damian. You have recently started as Secretary General of Science Europe. What is the view of Science Europe? Well, I think it's not fair to ask you what is the view of Science Europe with Foresight. I want to ask you what will you bring what is your view on what the view of Science Europe should be on Foresight? Yeah.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I've been only 1 week in office, so I have tried my best to catch up with the activities of the association, and indeed there is already some foresight activity at Science Europe. For those who may not be familiar, this is an association of 37 national research funding organizations or research performing organizations. So they normally either have humongous amount of money or they have large amount of researchers doing research. And at the level of the association, we try to pull in the expertise of the different research networks and research teams to do their own foresight exercises, let's say more field-related level. But perhaps what is more relevant when we talk about the community that we all together form is the implications of certain aspects related to research. For example, how the digital is informing the way research is doing, the methodologies in research, the way research is communicated, the impact that this has in the scholarly communication. So these are, if you like, perhaps less research-oriented foresight exercises, yet they are very important for the conduct of research itself. There are groups that are dealing with artificial intelligence. There are groups that are dealing, as I said, with scholarly communications or the impact of the digital transformation. There are groups that have some internal systems of alert. They act as an own brokerage system to be aware of the developments in research. But I think that there is also another type of foresight that is perhaps less known or is less treated as foresight, which is legal. For example, if we think about the genome, so what are the legal conditions that enable that research? And where are the limits of the research, where that is touching more the ethical considerations that you need to take into account for this type of studies. But when we do foresight as an exercise of predicting the future, legal aspects are also important because they can interfere or enable research in a certain area. So I think that foresight on legislation is also part of what you said, the strategic conversations that should take part.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to William Garcia. Now, William, CEFIC has recently published a foresight report called Molecules and Managers, A Journey into the Future of Europe with the European Chemical Industry. Tell us a bit about the experience. How useful was foresight for CEFIC, and how did you find the experience?
Thank you, Nikos, for inviting us. And CEFIC is the voice of the European chemical industry, and I'm the executive director in charge of this particular project within CEFIC. It's a first ever experience of using foresighting within the chemical industry community. And I must say that the main driver had been the worries about the future that many people have, and we do share this worry too. And we needed to find a way and a narrative to address many various, diverse, and sometimes conflicting trends that would force the future upon us. For that reason, we have decided a couple of years ago to use the foresighting methodologies, and again, the first ever exercise. So we sort of joined into the cold water as a community of experts, all being engineers and loving forecasting instead. But this time, we thought that using the traditional forecasting methods would actually might be running into more uncertainties than positive results for us. And we use foresighting for two main aims. One was to unite our board members, and there are 37 CEOs and executives of multinationals, European and non-European companies, but working internationally, and federations. So unite them all around plausible futures for the next 30 or so years towards 2050. And the second reason is that we wanted to be more shorter term, also oriented towards the new institutions, say, taking on duty, new commission, new parliament, sitting now in Brussels, and prompting with the right tools and the right questions, prompting many dialogues and conversation, as you said, Nikos, because that's all about engaging in dialogues and conversation about plausible futures. The reason why we moved away from traditional forecasting methods is that we couldn't in one forecast, unless we did it every year on and year for the next 10 years, we couldn't really address conflicting challenges upon us, like climate change on one side, health preservation and environmental protection on the other side, all coming to us into one go. Digitalization being both a technical issues and challenge and a societal challenge the same, bringing new skills on the market very soon. And finally, we needed also to have an address towards the societal elements and the fairness and the socially acceptable transition from one state to the other. So for those reasons, we went into the foresighting with a number of helps from the outside, because we didn't have all answers at the start 2 years ago. So we used the Copenhagen Institute for future studies. We used a few other consultants. We built up a huge database, knowledge base from many reports, ranging from the McKinsey, the Accentures, and the Korn Ferry of the world. And the outcome is that we have a book, this book here, Molecules Managers. We claim to be mastering the molecular bonds, but we do not claim to manage the future and have all answers. So we have more questions than answered in this book, but we open up to dialogue with the institutions.
Thanks very much, William. Catherine, I know that you are interested in scenario analysis and climate change risks. How do you think that foresight can improve strategy and risk assessment in HSBC in relation to climate? What do you think about foresight?
Yeah, thank you, Nikos. So first of all, we think that climate risk will affect our business model fundamentally. So in the way we kind of invest and finance over our customers and the customer needs, we think that we need to be better in climate risk foresight. So what this means is that we know that to kind of limit global warming, there is $1 trillion needed to kind of mitigate climate change. So in the end, it's a financial sector that is able to unlock the money that is needed to finance climate change. So in the end, coming back to foresight, what we need to be aware of is how we include climate risk within our scenario. So in the end, from an investor's perspective, climate aspects like ESG aspects, for example, environmental, social and governance aspects to include on the investment side is very much advanced from my view, but from a financing perspective, banks need to be better in foresight. So meaning that from our credit analysis, we need to know better the business models of our customers and how they kind of face the transition to a low carbon economy. And this is crucial for our wholesale portfolio, for our loan book in the end, because foresight or to give a loan in the end, it's that we believe we will get our money back, including interest rates, of course. But in the end, we believe that we will get the money back as credit creditor. So what we are currently doing is that since we disclosed the TCFD, maybe you have heard of this, this is a G20 initiative, a recommendation for companies, not only for the financial sector, but for companies to include climate risk within their business models and their strategy. So since we disclosed this one, we know better our transition risk sectors for our wholesale portfolio, and what we did is that we know all the risk sectors that we think are most exposed to climate change in an absolute number and in a relative number. And we need now to implement the climate risk aspects within our processes. So meaning that we need to talk about our customers about transition risk and climate risk. So we need to know better and we need to know to be better in including these risks within our decision-making process.
Okay. Well, thank you. I would like now to turn to Kerstin. Kerstin has been, when I started in Foresight in the Commission, Kerstin was the first Foresight expert I came across. So she's been involved in a number of Foresight projects that have to do with technology and innovation. And so I wanted her to tell us what have been her Foresight findings that impressed her more. So my question is open. Kerstin, what has been according to you, your most impressive Foresight finding?
There are several, and we also do not do prediction or prognosis. We also debate the future. So a systematic debate about the future, that is Foresight for us, and try to make at least something happen. And what surprised me most is looking back. You made me looking back 27 years ago when I started in Foresight. I see the same topics still on the agenda. There's the aging society where we lost all the years to prepare. We had a lot of data already. We knew what to do, but nobody did anything. On climate change, we did a little bit, changed our refrigerators at the millennium turn, but then nothing else happened. There are a lot more things like artificial intelligence, which was on the agenda very early, then had a AI winter, then came back, and now we have a hype. We are still talking about learning algorithms. We are not talking about real intelligence, but we have to talk about ethical and legal aspects, where we have some projects now currently going on, also on artificial intelligence for the commons, which is also quite interesting. But what surprised me most was that time, and this is my favorite, that time is still on the agenda. We don't know what time is. We don't know how to handle time. We don't know how to handle our personal time. We don't know how to handle our chronobiology. And meanwhile, we all get ill and do not get sleep anymore because we don't know how to deal with that. Could be quite easy, but it's really on the agenda. So it came back in the BMBF Foresight 10 years ago as really a big issue. And also time on measuring time, because we have to be more precise on measuring time. So we also need devices on the technological side. And the last thing that always surprises me is what people really do when they have the technology. So when the technology is there, look at the best example is look at what people are doing with ICT and when they got their smartphones. really have expected people using it a lot, using social media, developing apps, developing programs, running around with it, using the navigator. But what I did not expect was the addiction that we have towards our screens. So I think one of the next thing is really getting rid of this kind of screen addiction. This is related a lot to the time research and the chronobiology, but this is a cycle of my surprises, I would say, from the last 25 years.
Well, thank you. One of the things I have to admit publicly is that I've been trying to get Kirsten to come and give us a seminar on time for a couple of years. Now, if there are any of you who are interested, let me know who you are, and then that will increase the pressure to the Commission to do something like that. I'll turn to David now. David, you are currently involved in a project that builds research and innovation policy scenarios in other large regions of the world. And I'm wondering whether you can share with us some of your interesting insights in looking in those other regions of the world. What, in your view, are the trends that are likely to shape the research and innovation environment in other parts of the world? What's the most interesting stuff there?
Okay. Well, I shall be very global, because we've basically chunked up the rest of the world into 10 regions, and we've been looking specifically around research and innovation, but also more generally at the way that those regions might develop over the next 25 years or so. So I'll mention three trends that I think are really significant, and they also sort of illustrate the uses of foresight. Firstly, we all know this, the polarities of the world are shifting. There's a shift from north and west to east and south. We all know about the rise of China and India following the rise of the Asian tigers, and we know that many people are now predicting a bright future for Africa as well. And that creates opportunities and creates challenges as well, not only for Europe as an entity, but also for the international institutions that were built in part after the Second World War and in part after the Cold War. I'm thinking of the United Nations and its agencies, the IMF, the World Bank, the G20, the World Trade Organization. All those institutions will need to find ways to encompass the shifting polarities in the world, or else they will need to be either reinvented, or else they will lose influence and we'll have a much more decentralized world. And so foresight is actually essential in that, because you need to think of different ways in which that might pan out and think about what the policy and strategy responses are in a much less predictable world than the world that we've lived in for the last 2 or 3 decades. Secondly, demography. Again, demography, it's a fairly well understood trend, and it's a fairly sort of predictable trend as well. Kirsten briefly mentioned the aging population. There are now strong signals, UN population projections and other commentators, suggesting that the second half of the 21st century will see populations going into decline. So not only an aging population, but in most parts of the world, a population which is actually beginning to get smaller in size, with one exception, which is sub-Saharan Africa. And so again, that throws open huge foresight questions, because it creates massive uncertainties. The economic growth of Africa, which many people are foreseeing, is amplified by the fact that it's the only place in the world which has lots and lots of young people. And will a continent with lots of young people have a different take on the world and a different appetite for risk and innovation than countries where you have a shrinking and aging population? So again, got to do foresight, because you've got to think of different ways in which this might pan out. And then the third finding, I just thought it was worth mentioning innovation itself, because in looking at innovation in different regions of the world, we're seeing different approaches. I mean, come in here today, and there's this fantastic display of all the amazing things that Europe is doing on innovation, and an awful lot of research being commissioned, an awful lot of resource being sunk into it. And you would see the same if this event were happening in America or China these days, or Japan or South Korea. But in other parts of the world, there are different attitudes to research, partly and innovation. In Africa, there's a great deal of focus on incremental and adaptive innovation. For example, the use of IT and mobile and blockchain to make up for the lack of infrastructure and deficiencies in property laws. In India, there is well established, they even have a word for it, the concept of jugaad, which is translated as make, do, and mend. So rather than sort of looking constantly to build new, it's actually taking what you've got and trying to keep it working and make it work perhaps slightly better. In Russia, then we see a lot of incremental innovation where, I mean, the areas where Russia excels, space and military hardware, you can see linear incremental developments in those technologies which go right back to the 1940s and 1950s. So innovation means different things in different parts of the world. So again, in thinking strategically, then foresight techniques can actually help you to tailor what you want to do on innovation and the dialogue that you want to have with different regions in innovation to the different needs and the different circumstances of those regions.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have to congratulate my panelists for being superb sports on keeping the time. So now it's your turn. I am told that there is a microphone that comes in the form of something soft that you can throw to one another, only to people you like. But okay, I see a gentleman back there who is willing to start. There's a soft thing. Oh.
Yes, thank you. My name is Thorsten Fischer. I'm director of COVI, the EU liaison organization of German science organizations. And I would be interested in knowing from the governmental side on how, number one, the topics for scientific foresight would have been selected, under the control of the government in your country, and what were the mechanisms for financing the foresight, and for how long would you finance those foresight activities? And how do you come from the actual initiatives then to the concrete science and the scientific projects, from foresight to the scientific work? Thank you.
Just 1 minute, let me see if there is one more question. There's a question down there, guys. Let me collect a few because...
Yes, thank you. I am Dimitris Kiritsis from École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, a professor about manufacturing. Professor Klaus Schwab, so the founder and president of the World Economic Forum, wrote recently in its last manifesto, Globalization 4.0, that our societies have to move from the current model of produce and consume to the next one, which is share and care. Is it something that you consider for the future? If yes, what are the implications for research and innovation?
A wonderful question. I want to ask you, who is your favorite person to respond? If you don't have one, then I will allocate. David, yes, that would have been my choice. Okay, as we don't have any more questions, I'll ask Professor Azumas to answer the first question.
Yes, as I understood, you are the liaison office of Germany in Brussels. So Lithuania also has the liaison office in Brussels. So there is a constant communication between the European Commission liaison offices, attaché at the Embassy of Lithuania in Belgium. So we are trying to follow the general trends in the EU. The government tries, and we have constant consultations with the Commission in Brussels, and also we already had 2 consultations in Lithuania with the European Commission about the next period of structural fund support. And the issue which is important for our country is, of course, the synergy between the Horizon programs, for instance, and the structural funds which we are using in our country. So, as I said, the government established currently the governmental Center for Strategic Analysis. Before this center was under the umbrella of the Ministry of Education, Science and Sport, and that was the main analytical center for the ministry in, say, foresight or forecasting the priorities and possible directions of the research and development in the country. At the same time, we have the Strategic Council, which is chaired by the Prime Minister of the state, including the most important ministers of the state: Minister of Education, Science and Sports, Ministry of Economy and Innovation, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Healthcare, etc. So before the government accepts some priorities or strategic directions for the development, all these things are discussed at the Strategic Council of the state. So I don't know if I answer it, but probably.
Lydia wanted to have a go at the same question, I think. Huh? Ah, okay. Okay. We need there's this one as well. Okay.
Right. Globalization 4.0. How can it develop? I think one important aspect, and one which I know that is something Europe is very keen on, but also we're seeing sort of enthusiasm in many other parts of the world, is open science. It's actually working together to increase access to knowledge and information, and to make that more easily accessible and more easily shareable. And that is a way of promoting understanding and I think promoting goodwill in the world as well. And going beyond that, joint working, and we see that in all sorts of areas. It's there already. I mean, in the field of health, for example, then there are lots of ways in which developed parts of the world are working with less developed parts of the world to help address sort of serious health crises. I mean, we read a lot about malaria and mosquito-borne diseases, for example. Space. International space programs. Africa is now developing its own space programs, as is South America, and those are being developed in collusion not only with Europe but with other regions as well. So there are all sorts of ways of developing cooperation and goodwill which should work to the benefit of all, beyond just the matter of trade. I think for poor countries, trade remains a very, very significant impact, not least the desire to be able to export their goods to wealthier countries, and I think that is going to become an issue which will not go away. So in that sense, the sort of commercial aspect of globalization isn't going to go away. I suppose the other question mark, and again, this is a foresight question, is going back to my demographic point, aging population in most of the world, a very young population in Africa, then is there going to be sort of globalization for population? Are there going to be, what will the attitude be to immigration, to migration across continents? Will there suddenly be a sort of a demand for young people from Africa, or will we see a continuation of what we see at the moment, which is a reluctance in most of the West to actually allow immigration? We don't know, but we again, that's why we do foresight, because we need to think about the different outcomes that might happen.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I would like to add. First of all, thank you for bringing that very interesting sentence, that evolving from production and consumption to share and care, because I fully agree with you. I think it's one of the big dilemmas in our society today. And I think that when we put that into the science, I think that indeed open science is a must for the future. We can't keep on doing the things in science the way are being doing today. And the methodologies and philosophies beyond open science have to be fostered. and access to knowledge is of utmost importance. I also think that this caring, scientists have a mission or a critical responsibility to care for science, to improve reproducibility. There are critical examples of the lack of care for an excess of demand in production and a progression. And I think that it is the responsibility of the scientific community to care for us, bringing that sentence to the scientific world.
Okay. More questions? Okay. We'll take all 4 of them this time, and then, because this will be the last round of questions that we'll take. Where is the soft die? Okay, let's start from here and then move towards that side. 5, okay.
Hello. Congratulations for your panelists and the way in which you are addressing this issue. My name is Eden Mahmoud. I am the Secretary General of the Black Sea Universities Network, a network of 120 universities from the Black Sea region. The question that I have is that when we are talking about foresight, usually we are looking to some of the risks which are very far away. For instance, we are talking about climate change, which of course is changing the life every day. But for Europe, there are extremely higher and dangerous risks, starting with what is going to happen with the melting of the Northern Pole, with the influence of Russia and the frozen conflicts in the Southeast Europe, the problem of the Middle East and Northern Africa, and the current Brexit. But also there are problems regarding the internal cohesion. And for these kind of, let's say, aspects, of course, we cannot talk about innovation, just something out of the blue, which is not connected with this issue, and we are continuing playing with our toys. Share and care, I understand, in the sense of completely and fundamentally change of our mindset in addressing the risks which are next to us is not something very far. So how you will address this question?
I would love to address this question, but we'll pass it to one of our panelists, but let's go around the room. There is that gentleman over there.
Yeah, hello, thank you very much. I'm Andreas Janet from JRC. I'm working on coordination of standardization efforts. I would like to ask such a packed crowd of knowledge, which are the best known instruments for foresight in the area of innovation and technology. We are using horizon scanning or the innovation radar and things like that, but maybe there are other mechanisms which I didn't hear, and I'm very curious to hear when there is so many people working on foresight.
Okay, now we'll go to the other side of the room. There is a gentleman over there with the glasses, and then a woman behind him.
Good afternoon. My name is Falco Lohr from the Austrian Ministry for Innovation. I actually have a very similar question like my colleague from JSC. I would like to go back to the start and understand better what foresighting actually is. And so my question would go to Ms. Kuhls. I liked your definition of foresighting best. It's a systematic debate on the future. Maybe you could elaborate a little bit how this systematic debate would look like. Maybe you could guide us through one example and showcase how this system or systematic approach actually looks like, what you do to come to your conclusions. Thank you.
Okay, and like there.
Thank you. I'm Karin Metzler from European Plant Science Organization, and I would like to ask you how foresight could help to overcome artificial barriers we put up to combine different approaches. An example could be, for instance, to combine organic farming with genome editing to the benefit of environment and healthy diets.
Okay, Thank you. Now, I will be terrible, and I'll bring in another two questions. There's one is there, and the other one is here at the front, and that's it, guys. Sorry.
Thank you very much. My name is Petra Manderscheid. I work for JPI Climate. Thank you very much for these interesting contributions. And I just have maybe a question to the Commission then as well. To what extent foresight has led also to the missions? So now we, as we said, Kirsten, she said everything was on the table 25 years ago already, and it's still there, and we materialized in the form of the mission. So link foresight to mission, and what's the role of the missions then to continue the foresight to the next missions maybe? Thank you.
And finally, the lady there at the front.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the sharing, and I think it's so important for me to learn from your experience, from the expert. My name is Nhin Nguyen. I'm from Norway, and I think it's a kind of naive question, but I saw so many foresight exercise, which I involved 70% of my projects involve foresight there. And then I want to ask you how we can make foresight result or outcome into policy, because it just stopped into the recommendation, but then what is the process and mechanism, to make it into the real policy? Would you share with me some experience? Thank you.
Okay. What we will do is as follows. We'll pass the two questions on methodology will be on Kirsten, as you were mentioned, and you are, by I think, common understanding, our chief methodologist. So you start with that. Then there were the foresight and barriers. Catherine, will you take that on?
Yeah, sure. I thought probably I could give some insights on the policy aspect.
On the policy aspects as well. Okay. And who hasn't spoken yet? William is the person. You can take on the global, the all risks of the world. How do we? The first one. Which was, is innovation the answer to all the risks of the world? I think, did I frame it correctly? Yeah. And then I will reply on behalf of the Commission, and we need to all be very, very quick. Kirsten, very quickly.
Very quickly. You can have a full seminar on doing a kind of foresight cycle, but the foresight cycle, that is something I can quickly explain. It starts really with the anticipation, with the horizon scanning, with looking what is there ahead and what kind of data, information do we have? Not only in sources, but also in the heads of people. So we also need people in workshops or wherever, where we take them into account. The second step is the sense making. What does this mean for my foresight question? What does that mean for what I'm looking at? Do I look for nearly everything? Do I want to get an overview on things to come? Then I, of course, need something different than if I have a small research question on the foresight in cancer, for example. After this kind of sense-making, so what does it mean for me? How can I judge it? You really have to assess it. There are several different methodologies for that, especially consultations, but also we use their scenarios. What are alternative paths? We did not talk about that so much. There are different perspectives on everything. There is always an alternative. And there are different scenario methods and mixed of methods there. Of course, you can also work in workshops for the sense-making part. The third part is you have to set priorities. You can filter them out from your consultations and from Delphi surveys, from normal future surveys, from interviews, from the workshops, from wherever. You can filter it out by just using the data, but that is not enough. You also have to decide there. And this is something sometimes the foresighters, the organizers, as we are more the moderators of the processes, we are often not involved in that. That is sometimes doing the ministries, the responsible decision makers in the companies, and people like Nikos or higher ranking managers in the European Commission. And there is the decision. And not to decide is also a decision. And this is very important in foresight. If you don't decide, everything is going on somehow. We call it in German durchwursteln. So for those who know the word, we even had it for the science system, a scenario on durchwurschteln. And the last is the most important and the most difficult one, that is an implementation. Really to do something. We have the decision now, and then now come into something of doing it. And this is also often missing because there's, again, another bridge needed. We've heard that. How do you transfer it into policy making? One option is to take those who have to deal with that in the end into the process. So they are part of the process. They transfer it not only as multiplicators, but also as those who have to do at the end the work. That's it in short. Otherwise, you have to read some papers.
No, okay. William, do you want to?
Okay. If I understood well the question on
there are so many risks in the world. Is innovation the answer to all of them?
Right.
The answer cannot be one word. It needs one word and explanation.
To a science-based organization and industry, innovations is music to ears. So with that regards, and as a chemical industry player, I would say innovation can change the world. Now, that said, through this exercise, foresighting exercise, we went through 5 megatrends. Only to few of them, innovation can play a significant role, and I would distinguish the incremental innovation and the breakthrough innovation. Now, to others, we need to think of social innovation as well, in which I would classify the new business models under economic and social innovation. But education and the way we educate our young generation towards the new forthcoming challenges on how to handle artificial intelligence, how to work and live and work in a digital world without being captured by screens 24 hours, 7 days a week. So that's the sort of innovation which goes on the side of the pure science, I would say. Now, as again, our industry is technology-driven. We are a bunch of engineers and economists in this organization, and we employ 1.2 million people who have, all of them, each of them have a scientific background one way or the other. For them, innovation and breakthrough innovation for the European way of addressing the global challenges, because we have a European way to addressing global challenges, and there are some questions being asked in this report, and few answers being given as well, open to dialogue. For those working in Europe and willing to develop the European way, breakthrough innovation really makes sense. And we are seeking for a innovation in the field of energy efficiency for our crackers, for instance, but also on the product side, how to integrate artificial photosynthesis, for instance, looking into the next 30 or so years. In this book, you would find a time scale with those innovations coming from a European perspective, potentially saving a number of issues, global issues.
Thanks. Catherine, the questions on policy and foresight as a way of overcoming barriers?
Yeah, okay, so I will try to give my best. So in regard of policy, so I think so probably Europe's answer to the financial crisis was the EU Action Plan on Sustainable Growth, which I really like. And I guess we need some more transparency on the way we unlock capital in a way. So the taxonomy is key to all of to the financial industry to better know what is a green and what is not a green investment, so to say, and what kind of business model will be suitable for the transition to a low carbon economy in the end. And secondly, so to give you some more insights on the way we are working, so is what I always
what I'm always faced with is with my risk colleagues when I'm talking with them, that they are telling me we have poor data in regard of climate. So we have data from listed companies, but when we are giving loans to small and medium-sized enterprises, a lot of them do not even have a sustainability function or someone who is kind of collecting climate data. So in the end, we do not know how to cover this one. So data is key. And in the end, what I know is that it must be a kind of dynamic model, was what my risk colleagues are trying to tell me. We need to have a dynamic model that will kind of set up a scenario that we will be convinced in the end that the business models of our clients is suitable for the future. So, and I'm happy to know what a dynamic model will look like.
Okay. I will take on the little question on the missions and in general the relationship between the foresight and policy. In the Commission, we don't believe that you should de facto bring foresight to policy or that you should necessarily base policy on foresight. We think that if we make this connection, foresight becomes political and from the beginning and just blows it out of the water. So we prefer to keep it separate and just make foresight one advocacy voice for different things. That replies to your question from Kovi as well as the question on the missions. So we didn't base the missions on foresight. Once the mission areas were decided, now we are launching projects to actually try and help the people involved find a way forward. Now we reach this point at which we have 3 minutes. And I would like to ask my wonderful panelists to make one exotic prediction for 2030 each, something that they would be willing to get to give the odds a 1 to 10 odds betting. We'll go from my left to right, and Professor Razumas will give us the final statement as the most senior person in the panel, not in age. I think I am the most senior person in age, but David, go on.
Right, I think I have half a minute. I was thinking about this and I thought about plastics. And then I arrived and I saw that magnificent display outside about the impact of plastics, and particularly plastics in the sea. My prediction is that by 2030, the science which is beginning to emerge of developing enzymes which allow plastics to be eaten and then recycled in reusable forms will have reached a stage where it can be exploited commercially. So we will get to the serious business of cleaning our oceans.
Okay, my foresight by 2030 would be that by then we would have reached a status in which societies will operate under the concept of circular economy.
So I expect that for companies, one way to scale up capital for the low-carbon transition is to provide more transparency on the climate risk profile for assets. And I'm convinced that we will see more and more companies disclosing the TCFD, and that they all will kind of disclose more on climate risk.
As conservatives want.
I have a very sad one. By 2030, nearly all people will be short-sighted. And I don't mean foresight. I don't mean the long-term view and the short-term view. I mean really short-sighted. Because scientists detected now that there's a mechanism in young people how long their lenses can adapt during growth. And with our screens, we now train them in the wrong direction, so that nearly all young people, or at least those young people who are always watching a screen, will be short-sighted in 2030, and we now have 10 years for education on the one side, and on the other side for innovation to repair what we already did.
Gromp, yes, William.
If I may, I will go a little bit political before you go, Mr.
Quick.
We are by 2030, you said, and so that's going to be the COP36, maybe the last one of the series of 36 in a row, where we're going to be speaking one voice on climate change and finally have the actions lined up, in a not intended but really actions with our American fellow citizens of this group on the same.
That is a good wish. you have the final word, and you have
Yeah.
1 minute,
Thank
then
you.
we'll be kicked out.
Good. Tomorrow I'll meet with the number of European Parliament members and also with the Commissioner Moedas. And I will be accompanied by Professor Virginijus Šikšnys, the inventor of the gene editing technology. And I think that this technology in 2030, that will be the leading technology in agriculture and medicine. And you wanted me to wish something to
Absolutely.
EU. So science and technology foresight, the main topic of our today's discussion is of course important, but I think that even more important is the use of science and technology in foresight processes. And I also wish for EU foresights and national foresights to be more impact-orientated. That's, I think, important. This is very important for us politicians, although have been scientists before, but now I'm a politician, and the impact-orientated foresights are very important for us to make decisions. Lithuania is also quite happy of the EU's awareness of the need of the new vice president position. The position is called Interinstitutional Relations and Foresight. So I wish for the vice president good luck, and I wish good luck for the EU and national foresight experts. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You've been wonderful. That's it. We now have to run because there's another group that needs to come in.